Brutal. And I just hit record. I wish I would have got that a second earlier. That would have been great. Our lecture would have started off with, Jenna's a bad person. Alright, so again, we're talking about last week how we had explorers that came to America. They would take. They would bring in their diseases. The Native American population drops immensely. But we have to start thinking about, well, what about permanent European settlement? Europeans that came to America stayed and started to affect the landscape. And if we're going to talk about that, we have to start with the Pilgrims and the Puritans. So what do we know? Anything? George?
Pilgrims came over on the Mayflower.
Pilgrims came over on the Mayflower. Okay, that's good. What else do we know?
Pilgrims were Puritans.
Pilgrims were Puritans, and more appropriately, they will join with the Puritans, and we'll talk about when that happens. But they basically, I think the point we're making is it's the same faith. And you're right, it is Puritan faith. Anything else? Yes, good. They both came from England. All right, so what we need to know, and what we'll talk about in a sec, is that it was about 1608 when the Pilgrims decided to break away from England, and we'll talk about why. But we're thinking 1608, well, the stuff we were reading last week, it was like 1490, 1498, we're at the end of the 1400s. So what happened over those 100 years? What's going on? What's happening in America, right? Well, the explorations continued, and the Native Americans began to fight back. We have cases of Native American tribes forming alliances with certain countries in order to destroy or take out their enemies, their enemy tribes. And so we had a lot of that. Basically, we had 100 years of fighting, and we call that the Indian Wars. Did you guys learn that in history?
No.
We learned about rebellions and then...
Native American rebellions?
Yeah.
Okay. That's part of it, because obviously the Native Americans did put up a fight against the Europeans. But what we find is that a lot of them actually also took on the fighting style of the Europeans and actually joined some of them for the sake of destroying their enemies. And so it's just kind of this 100 years of a lot of different instances where everyone's fighting everyone. Right? And so then we jump to England, and we have this situation brewing, where we have Puritan faith that is going up against the Church of England, okay? And so the Church of England is set up much like the Catholic Church, where we have, priests and churches, and we go to Mass, and we give, certain amounts of donations to the church and whatnot. And we listen to, we listen to priests give sermons and whatnot. But the Puritans had a different feeling about the church. They said, look, the church shouldn't be organized, and we shouldn't look up to priests. We should focus on the Word of God. And the Word of God comes from the Bible. And that's what we need to base ourselves on. So we shouldn't be giving money to a church. We don't need this whole structure. We just really need the Bible. And we need to believe in that. Well, things got a little messy in England. And these groups started to started to suffer. They started to be persecuted. And they started to lose the ability to have their religious freedoms. And so, what would anybody do in that case? Well, not anybody, but anybody that was that strong in their faith, they said, well, we're out of here. We're gone. Right? And so the Pilgrims were the first. And when they weren't always called the Pilgrims. They actually started off in this town in England called Scrooby. I know, it sounds like Scooby-Doo the cartoon. And so while they were in Scrooby, they were known as the Scrooby Separatists. Yeah, I know, that's clever, right? Yes, get it out of your system now. Go ahead. Thank you, Justin. So the Scrooby Separatists said, okay, we're leaving. We can't do this anymore. Because they were actually known as a group that was going against the Church of England, and that causes a big problem because the Church of England at the time was tied to the monarchy, to the throne. And so if you went against the church, you went against the king. And you didn't want to do that. So like I said, in 1608 they leave. But they don't leave straight to America. Alright? They actually decide they're going to leave and they go to another European country and settle there for a while. And they actually end up in the Netherlands. So in the Netherlands, everything's great. It's a beautiful country. Everyone's really nice. But there's only one problem. We're the minority. We're new here. And we're being discriminated against. So while the Netherlands is a great place where we can practice our religious freedom, guess what? In society in general, we're being discriminated. People treat us like we're foreigners, like we don't belong, like we're not part of the community. And they do this for 12 years. And so over the course of those 12 years, they're trying to find money to continue their voyage. They're trying to get out of there and go somewhere new. And they hear about the stories from this new land, from the new world. And their leader was this man named William Bradford. And so William Bradford took the group, and in 1620, they decide to leave, and they leave for America. And so Bradford, at that time, gives them the name Pilgrims, because they were on this pilgrimage to the New World. And they're on this pilgrimage to find religious freedom. And so they figure, okay, if we go to the New World, there's no population there that exists that's going to discriminate against us. It's going to be our land, and we can pretty much do whatever we feel. And we can practice however we want. And so they do that. And so they make it to America. And basically they're there for, figuring it out. Meanwhile, back in England, there's another group of Puritans. Alright? And they decide that they're going to try and work it out with the Church of England. So they say, look, I'm not leaving my home. I know too many people. I have businesses here. I have family here. There's no way I'm just going to up and leave. I'm not nuts. And quite frankly, I think the Pilgrims went way too far when they left. And we can work this out. The Church of England, they're reasonable people. We believe in the same God. We believe in the same Bible. This will be fine. And so they stayed all the way past 1608. But then in 1630, they realized, yeah, this isn't going to work. They treat us horribly. They imprison some of our leaders. And we need to get out of here. So their leader at the time was John Winthrop. That should be an H. Alright. So John Winthrop takes them 10 years after the Pilgrims left the Netherlands, and they go to America. And they join the Pilgrims. And again, remember, they believe in the same things. And we'll talk about that belief probably tomorrow or the next day. So we'll get more into their faith, what it involves and everything like that later. But what we really just need to know are the timelines of when the Pilgrims traveled, when they got to America, when the Puritans decided to leave England, and when they got here. Okay? And so what ends up happening is they get here, they settle, but before you know it, what happens in 1691, they create a pact where they join. And so now there are no more pilgrims. It's just everyone's Puritan. So it's this one large Puritan community that spans or that extends throughout the eastern United States. And so 1691, these two groups join, and it pushes us into this new Puritan way of life in America. And so we did kind of make a historical jump now, because we're really fast forwarding from Columbus in 1492, 200 years later, to a Puritan community in America. But really, this is the next time that we see literature that's produced in America. Because once the Native Americans, we wrote down their oral traditions, then the Europeans came and started to write down their accounts of what exploration was like and the New World was like. We really don't see a lot produced after that, until we get to these Pilgrim and Puritan settlers. All right? And I know it's tough. It's Monday, first class of the day, and I'm lecturing at you. But we got to get this information down. All right? And so what we really want to know about this is you have to remember that the problem with settling, and the reason no one had done it prior, is that there were too many Native American populations, and it became very dangerous. And it continued to stay dangerous all the way through to when what we would later call Americans were pushing west towards the Pacific Ocean. But at this time it was extremely dangerous, and rightfully so, because these settlers were taking the land of the Native Americans, so the Native Americans by this point figured out that they needed to fight back, and they did. And so one of the first types of readings that we're going to deal with is called the captivity narrative. And this is where some of these Puritan writers would write these stories about Native American savages taking beautiful young women captive from their cities and from their towns. And it's kind of this mix between a religious tale, a religious fable, and a way of painting the Native American in a bad light. And so we're gonna read some of those. But before we do, for tonight, there's just a small background video on the whole Pilgrim Puritan journey to America that I want you to watch. It's about 15 or 20 minutes long. And then there's a timeline as well. I just want you to look at the timeline so that way you know where we've been as far as what we've read and what's happened in between to where we are now. And we push, from here on, we're pushing between 1670 and beyond 1700 for the things that we're going to read. Alright. So does anybody have any questions about this? And again, we'll talk about their faith and what the difference was between the Church of England and what the Puritans believed when we start getting into specifically Puritan writing. All right, but I just wanted to introduce you to the timeline and the history of these two groups. Anything? Any questions? Yes, George.
Pilgrims, did they create Thanksgiving?
Well, Thanksgiving was a result of the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims actually almost didn't survive their first winter when they came here. And the only reason they survived was the help they received from a Native American tribe. As far as, how to survive, where to build a house. Because where they actually landed was a huge, swamp area. So where to build a house, how to grow food, how to survive cold winters. So because of that, we kind of have this idea of Thanksgiving. Katie, did you get it? This was the year that the two groups joined, 1691.
I think I read something about this guy who ate his wife, there was cannibalism going on and stuff.
Oh yeah, there was a lot of that going on at that time. Just because you couldn't. Many of these people didn't survive. A lot of them actually died. Yeah, but it's good to know too that the Puritans were a much larger group than the Pilgrims. So when the Puritans came over in 1630, they were about 3 times as large as the Pilgrim group that came. This Pilgrim group was pretty small. All right. So any other questions about that? Was that a question or just a stretch?
Well, not about that.
Okay, well what's your
Are
question?
you still recording?
Why, do you have something mean you want to say about someone?
No.
Okay, no, I'm going to stop it right now actually.